Welcome back to Alchemize with Alanna. I'm your host, Alanna Levenson, leadership advisor and executive coach. And on this show, we talk about what it really takes to lead today. And it's more than strategy and performance. And before we go further, let's take an Alchemize moment. And here's a question for those listening or watching later on. How are you reacting or responding to what's happening around you, or consciously choosing who you are becoming through it? Because there's a lot going on these days. And there's a lot of things that are going to be impacting us going forward that we don't expect. But that question becomes even more relevant when we start looking at how leadership itself is changing. So let's start with something that many organizations are rethinking right now, because the world of work is evolving faster than most of us ever really expected. AI is reshaping how we work, how decisions are made, and even how we think about knowledge and expertise. But if information, or what is being seen as knowledge, is becoming abundant and accessible to everyone, what actually makes someone a great leader now? Today's conversation explores that exact question. My guest today has been thinking deeply about this, about the future of leadership and the future of work, especially as AI accelerates change across organizations. And what stood out in our prep conversation for the show, was how quickly his thinking has evolved about this. Now, when we met, he said that just a month before that, he saw AI largely as a chatbot tool with limitations, but then shared that he now sees capabilities emerging that go far beyond simple interactions, and capabilities that could reshape how teams operate, how managers lead, and how performance is developed. And he's focused on building tools that help leaders better understand their own conversations, decisions, and impact with their teams. Almost like performance telemetry for leadership, similar to how professional sports teams analyze game plays to improve performance. So what does leadership require in this new era? So please welcome Ben Perreau.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to finally have you on this show, because we were supposed to do this a couple of weeks ago. So first topic, annual reviews. And that, is about ongoing leadership feedback. So for decades, performance management, for the most part, has relied on annual or biannual reviews or occasional feedback conversations. But work and teams are moving faster and are constantly evolving. So although this model, it hasn't made sense for a while, and it absolutely doesn't now. A question for you is, you used this analogy of the sports team reviewing game footage. I loved that. So how can leaders start thinking about their conversations and decisions in a similar way?
Yeah, I think the sports team analogy works best because really high performance sports teams have been optimized over many years of iterations. And we've arrived at a place where great sports teams have a coach who's helping them be performant. And they usually have an environment they're working in that they can operate in. But they also increasingly use data, analytics, playback, a better understanding of the telemetry of the game to improve their ability game by game by game, rather than waiting for the end of the season to go and do a reset and work out what needs to change. And so I think the sports team analogy is good for that reason. And so when you look at that in the context of performance reviews, historically we would do performance reviews, to your point, Alanna, once a year, once a quarter, there'd be some feedback. It just doesn't work anymore. It's becoming increasingly untenable to wait 3 months, even a month, to get feedback on how you're doing. And so my belief is that we need to start thinking about that more as a daily conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's a company that I worked at, a global tech company, Cisco. We actually had, we did do not so much a biannual performance review per se. It was more looking at our role and our career aspirations and things like that. But we did a weekly check-in. Every Friday, we were prompted to put into a platform and share, actually our kind of like our highs and lows, our loves and loathes, which was interesting language because it was emotionally triggering for people. And I'm just going to say this too, because I was there and I experienced it.
Yeah.
The way that system was rolled out, there was lots of misinterpretation of what that really meant. And I don't know how often leaders took the time to explain it, but that process itself of checking in that frequently was different than anything I had ever seen or experienced. And to me, it was a lot more effective. And it could really give leaders, if they paid attention to it and used it as a tool to, even though they might talk to their team members a couple times a week, it's a different conversation.
Yeah, I mean, learning to lead needs to be a read-write activity, right? It can't just be a read or a write. You both need to inhale and exhale when you're thinking about how you improve. And so a weekly process like that, I'm sure, just a small little company like Cisco, I imagine you managed to change the arc of how things were going quite significantly and all like that. If you can start to tighten the turns and make iterations a little in smaller turns, we've been doing this in software for years, working in an agile way, making tighter turns, iteratively working towards our goals. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't do it in leadership. But I think historically, leadership has been so opaque to us. What is leadership? How do we measure it? How do we understand what's going on? And so I think AI has enabled the possibility now for us to be able to put our finger on what it is, but also to be able to instrument it. And so I think that just means that we can tighten those turns even more. We can go from weekly to daily. If people really want to, they can look meeting to meeting, conversation to conversation, and say, how are the set of interactions going across this particular set of relationships? How am I doing with this particular person who I'm trying to learn how to lead in a new way? And so you should be able to ask those questions of your own leadership and understand what's possible. And ideally, there's a way of doing that without losing your own humanity as well.
Well, what I do appreciate about that process is like really slowing down. It's slowing down and taking a look at those relationships and dynamics with intention, versus just consistently moving on and not reflecting back at it, because I think there's so much gold there and being able to learn about it. But so on that note, your platform analyzes leadership conversations and provides feedback. I saw it, so you did a demo of it for me. So what kinds of insights can leaders actually gain from that kind of analysis?
Yeah, good question. So I'm one of those people who will send a high stakes email or get off the end of a meeting and go, how did I do? And I'm constantly wondering, and with an email, I'll go back and look in my sent box and say, did I write the right stuff? Am I going to invoke the right reactions? How am I thinking about the cause and effect of my behavior on other people? And good leaders are thinking about that stuff. But it's a lot to carry cognitively all the time, especially when more and more is being demanded of managers than it was ever before. Lots of organizations, I know Dell announced in October, November, they wanted everyone below the VP level to have 20 direct reports. And so just that sheer volume of people you're trying to sort of manage the cognitive load over is really, really heavy. And so, it's just a lot. It's a lot. I mean, if you do one-to-ones with those people every week, then you're spending, 2.5 days in one-to-ones, it's a lot.
Well,
so,
yeah. No, go ahead. Finish what you were going to say.
No, please.
Okay. Well, on that note too, when leaders or business owners talk to me about checking in, whatever that check-in is for, sometimes I think there's this belief system that has to be like this 30-minute, hour-long conversation. It doesn't. It can be 15 minutes. If you're really, really intentional about it and you want to provide some sort of consistency around it, which that consistency can really create ease and calm for the people that work for you or work with you and report to you, because they'll know what to expect. They'll know what to prepare, versus walking in and it's just a random conversation and when they're stressed about everything that they have to get done on their plate. And so it's really utilizing time in a more intentional, productive way.
Yeah, how can we be more intentional with our time, and what are the things we really want to spend the time on? And I suppose what we're trying to do at Parafoil is make sure that we accept that the cognitive load of meetings is going to exist and that you're going to continue to lead people. I don't believe there's a future where people aren't leading people. I just don't think that future exists. We can talk about that if we want to. But in the meantime, as we think about the time you have to spend managing people in meetings, making sure that you're having conversations, how do you make sure they're good ones? And that means arriving at the conversation fully present, able to participate in the conversation, knowing what you talked about last time, being able to have a conversation with that person as a human being, recognizing that they are a full human being with all of the fullness of themselves. And so the more you can, delegate some of the cognitive load, which is just functional, memory. What did you talk about last time? What are the things you're working on as a leader in this moment? What are the conversation topics you're carrying? What are the things that are important to the two of you in this moment? What leadership styles does this person respond best to? Those kinds of things are insights that you can now gather from a third-party tool so that you can focus on the active leadership. What should we be doing in this moment to be able to drive the most amount of performance out of the relationship we have? How do we make sure this is a good relationship so that this person feels that they're growing? So I think being able to focus on the right things and not on the wrong things is our goal. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to do that more and more in our day-to-day work.
Well, and it also requires slowing down to reflect on these questions and ask yourself these questions. I mean, what comes up a lot in probably the majority of my sessions are leaders and business owners reflecting on past conversations, past meetings, or an email that they received, and they're digesting it, or they're preparing for what's coming up, a conversation, a meeting, a presentation, a performance review, hard conversation, difficult decision about people that report to them and that sort of thing. So it's, all of that, like really slowing down and, thinking about these in a way where they can enhance relationships and feel more productive and get more out of your team and feel like things are moving smoothly, and it lessens friction and resistance that might be occurring in the environment.
Yeah, and how do you reduce that friction more and more so that you can try and do a good job? And I think that's what this moment demands of us, because there's just so much friction at work now. There's so many more tools, so many things to be using, so many things that are getting in the way of what is actually just a group of people working in some kind of level of concert, trying to achieve some kind of outcome. That's all a company or a team really is, right? And we've become encumbered by all of this stuff, project management tools, all of this other stuff. So I think I really believe, how can you kind of get out of the way to make sure you're trying to carry the most amount of burden for somebody else? And I think, that's what the opportunity is. It's not create more homework for everyone. It's try and find a way to have less homework, right?
Well, that speaks to the readiness of leaders and how they're showing up and how they're developing themselves, in addition to helping the professional development of their teams and the people that report to them too. But what do you think will be required for a leader's readiness about transparency in their own leadership behaviors and decisions, especially maybe the ones that maybe your platform brings light to?
I mean, what's going to become required of leaders increasingly as they have to start to think about more transparency? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, like in terms of them needing to be more transparent regarding their own behaviors and decisions.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a new leader, just stepping into the role for the first time, I certainly didn't have the comfort to be able to be vulnerable about the things that I wasn't good at. And I think most leaders who step into the role aren't sure what it's okay to be vulnerable about and what it's okay to not be vulnerable about. And actually, I would encourage people to be more vulnerable rather than less in general, because it tends to be a quality that makes you more likable and also easier to learn from. But lots of folks are quite insecure, as I was when I first stepped into management, about stepping into leadership and what it entails. And I think, this moment, this time, we are all living in a world where we're so much more visible, so much more online, so much more three-dimensional to people in a way that is hard to really hide yourself in a way that maybe people used to just bring one facet of themselves to work. Usually someone's going to find your Instagram, they're going to find your Facebook. You're a real human being figuring your stuff out. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So if you've got something else going on, like I think it's important for people to start to see you as a three-dimensional human being. And so when you talk about transparency, I think there's transparency in who you are and who you're trying to become. And there's transparency in how you want to lead and what you want to do and what you're trying to achieve. And just this moment, this time demands greater transparency of us, I think, than ever before. And so increasingly, we have to be people who can show up and be confident in being more transparent about our decisions, our choices, who we are, what we're not so good at, what we need to be better at. I think those are just parts of leadership today that maybe weren't so much part of leadership when I first started leading people, 25, 30 years ago. So it's changing, and it's changing fast now with AI as well. I think that is also changing how people lead. So I think it's something we all have to bear in mind and be intentional about. And to your point, Alanna, slow down and be thoughtful about, rather than rushing forward and assuming that we want to just, take everything on and then find ourselves so far over our skis that it's overwhelming. And that happens more often than not.
Well, and I want to bring attention to one of the comments in the chat, which is, I think we're moving from leaders being respected for being right to being respected for being real. And I also want to acknowledge you for you allowing yourself to be vulnerable here and sharing that at some point in your career, you too were insecure, because that's not a word that I hear, especially men, use very often. And I say that because I would say 85, 90% of my clients are men. And they do share things with me in sessions that sometimes they don't feel comfortable sharing with other people because of who you have to show up to be in the workplace. Leaders in general, women and men, are assumed to need to have all the answers all the time. And that's not necessarily true. But there's, these days, especially with AI and how quick everything is evolving and the changes that are being made operationally and organizationally, I think it is making leaders feel more insecure these days about many things.
Yeah, it is. It is a time of great insecurity, right? In people's jobs. I know that in tech, especially, but in all sorts of roles, lots of people have been worried about, what does this mean for my job? What's going to happen? But I think there are things you can do. There are ways you can think about leadership that make you are going to make you more valuable to the workforce in the sort of 2 to 3 year time horizon. And so it's important to think about that stuff now and to be intentional about it, and not worry about it too much, but just recognize that I think that the shape of your work will change, and being cognizant of that and thinking about how it might change is probably a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and the shape of our work and how it's changing is a great topic for performance reviews. So something that I want to prompt the audience about is, when someone on your team is struggling, do they have to wait for a review to hear about it? Or are you supporting them in learning and adjusting in real time? So really think about that for those that are out there listening. Okay, so let's move into a little bit more about how AI is influencing leadership. So many leaders still think that AI primarily is a chatbot or a productivity tool. But you mentioned that even your own perspective on AI has changed dramatically in the last few months. So what has shifted for you?
I think what shifted for me personally was that I started to see that the quality of inference for some of these models has significantly improved in the last 8 weeks. And I think I was worried for a minute that we would start to assume that AI and chatbots were the same thing. and that the full expression of what artificial intelligence models, large language models, which is the particular wave of AI we're in right now, was all about chatbots. And for the first few years it was. I think what's shifted for me is I've started to see people start to get more creative with their applications for how you can use large language models, which at their heart are really just, knowledge repositories and then predictive language engines. And the predictive language engines are using the knowledge repositories to go and work out what word to choose next. But we're in a world now where people are starting to think more creatively about what's possible, and I think it's moving beyond just the chatbot, which is not an interface I'm particularly fond of. Just using a chatbot for all of your interactions to me is like trying to drink a meal through a straw. You're just sort of sitting there going, oh wow, like word. When in actual fact, we've developed all these wonderful two-dimensional, sometimes three-dimensional interfaces for us to go and be able to use things with. So enjoy the meal in the pieces you want it in, so that you can actually try and consume it. So I think what's changing for me is we're starting to get more sophisticated in our use of what we currently consider these AI models, and so I'm seeing more opportunity for them in the workplace for positive use, rather than necessarily just I'm just going to chat with my chatbot about this thing and then use it as a crutch, which was, I think, where a lot of us worried it was going to go.
Well, so speaking of chatbots, I messaged you on LinkedIn about an AI chatbot product by a supposed executive coach, which I'm starting to realize some of these are actually not real people.
Oh, really? Oh,
I think
goodness.
it's an overlay persona selling.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, so you mentioned that you were at an HR AI conference. Was it Transform? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And that
Last
there
week.
were. Okay, so and you mentioned that there's like these, a lot of these chatbots posing as coaches. So are they really just GPT skins, or are they built by, tech bros who don't really understand people? Like what's going on with this?
Yeah. You spent many years developing expertise in this arena. I also spent, a decade, a leadership development firm, understanding how leadership works after I'd had my own leadership career. I think there's a lot of people in tech who arrive at a problem and say, well, this problem hasn't been solved yet, and why not me? And I think, well, okay, I mean, I admire the courage of doing that. Of course, anybody who starts a company, I admire the courage of it. But there's a lot of products out there where somebody has literally just taken an API key from OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, and they've skinned it up to look like it's, they've said, you are a coach. You need to behave like a coach. Say coachy words. And then you put the chatbot live on stage, metaphorical internet stage, and people can have a conversation with it like it's a coach. And I think, how is that going to coach you to really get better? There's no human experience there. There's no channeling of your own context. A coach is there to be able to, I mean, you can articulate this much better than I can, I'm sure, Alanna, but a coach is there to help expose the truth within you and help you find, epiphanies in yourself by having lines of conversation that direct you towards them. And coaches are very intentional about that, sometimes over the course of many years, to help you get to that piece of work. And so I think it's really important to be able to have these kind of people in your life. And to me, a chatbot is not it doesn't work instead, And so I've seen a lot of those products. I saw 3 or 4 of them at Transform. I think there's about 7 or 8 of them in the market now, not including the individual one-off, that guy you sent me. There's a lot of those products out there, and I don't know if they're really adding value to the experience of what it means to lead.
I've been doing this for 21 years, and it's been very interesting to see how the industry is evolving at an extremely fast pace. It's hard to keep up sometimes, or at least it feels that way. But yeah, I mean, the value of that, right? So, okay, so I want to go to the fact that some people are experiencing a little bit of anxiety around AI. what mindset should leaders have or adopt? For those that are listening to this, who are like the leaders that are feeling some anxiety about AI, what do you want to tell them?
Yeah, I might age myself here, but I'm old enough to remember a time before search engines existed. And, Google's mission after it was don't be evil became, to democratize the world's information. And so they started to do that quite significantly to the point where pretty much, all of the sort of knowledge that has existed for long enough and has been published enough, broadly enough, has become more available at our fingertips than ever before. And so we're at a place now where even through search engines, there's an abundance of what I would call facts, knowledge, the kind of stuff that you can just go and read a book and learn. And so that has really changed the game in terms of how we acquire the kind of stuff that you can read a book and learn. There's YouTube now, amazing way to go and do this stuff, bring to life the stuff that you used to be able to just go and read a book and learn. Like I learned about, I was a self-taught photographer. I was a photojournalist for a very short period. I love photography, and it's a great way for me to be able to kind of take time out. I've learned most of that through looking at YouTube videos, reading books, but I've also learned a lot of that through taking pictures. And in fact, the only stuff I've really learned about photography is when I've got out there with my camera and started clicking the shutter. And that's when I've really started to improve my photography. I look at the photographs, I take photographs, I look at the photographs. Sometimes I have a friend over my shoulder saying, hey, if you shot the photograph differently, then maybe you'd be able to get a different outcome from that photograph. But I've learned a lot more through praxis than I have necessarily through reading the books. And so I think we're in a world now where the knowledge that we have available to us will continue to become more and more ubiquitous. In fact, you could say that anything that has been sort of published more than 6 to 8 weeks ago is broadly available in large language model somewhere, and therefore you can access it. And so you can no longer keep knowledge. It's just done. That game is over. And so to the extent where you are somebody who only wants to keep knowledge or you route tasks through a system, those parts of your job will go away, is my belief.
Well,
and so,
and I guess
yeah.
This actually points to an old saying that's been around for God knows how long of
Right.
it's not just about knowledge or information, it's about how you use it. And
Yeah.
in the example that you gave around photography, and how the suggestion of how you can get better at it, and it's in the practice of it.
Yes.
What it makes me think about, and what I'm connecting the dots to, is when I'm talking to business owners and leaders, and they're sharing with me a conversation they need to have with someone. And I'll ask them, so what is your initial instinct on how you're going to approach it? And they'll tell me. And then I'll do a role play with them. So they get to try it on. And we'll switch back and forth. So in the beginning, I'll be them and they be the other person. And I'll model to them a way of having that dialogue. They don't, I preface it by saying, you don't have to use my verbiage. You don't have to use the words that I say. If you resonate with them, please do. But I would want you to do this in your own way. I'm just modeling to you and demonstrating you a way that you can engage this person in this conversation that you need to have. That's is they're sharing is uncomfortable, or they're not looking forward to it. And then we'll do that, and then I'll ask them, how was that for you on the receiving end? What did you hear from me? Right. And then we'll switch, and then they'll get to try it on, and then they get it in their cellular memory and practice it with me. And then now, because they've already, in essence, had the dialogue, it's going to be that much easier and that much more comfortable to be able to do it again with the real person.
What a great way to be able to start to have the conversation before you have it. And they also get the lived experience of being on the receiving end of the conversation as well. And I think that's what's great about having somebody who's interactive, who's really a coach, who's thinking about how you're going to have those conversations in a way that you aren't going to get from a chatbot in any way. And so, as I think about the skills that are going to become more and more important in the future, I'm imagining that everyone is thinking, okay, with knowledge set to one side, you're going to need more of this, right? How do you generate more empathy with what's going on? How do you generate better decision making? All of those things. So I think there are skills that are going to rise to the fore and become more and more important, and a lot of them, I think, are the ones that most people who are in search of becoming better leaders are going to have to develop, and I'm sure are already on the path towards developing decision-making skills, discernment, empathy. We talk about empathy. All those things are going to become more and more important. In fact, I think the post-knowledge era is going to lay it all bare, and that's going to become the differentiator in terms of performance.
Yeah. Well, and so you mentioned that to me also when we were talking about in a world where information is abundant, that skills like storytelling and discernment and judgment and empathy become even more important. And I look at those and I think about how they correlate to the hard conversations my clients often have to have. So from your perspective, why those skills?
Because, those are the skills which, one, a machine won't do well for you. Leadership is about compelling people to follow you because you're on the journey to do something greater than the sum of the people that you've got here. It's about finding a way to make a choice that's difficult in the moment that may take you to a place that nobody else was able to go or willing to go. And leadership requires those things of you. And if you're a team who's trying to achieve, outsized outcomes, with outsized impact, then if everyone has access to the same models, and they will, then everyone's going to have access to the same knowledge. So how do you differentiate yourself? Well, if we don't want every company to be the same, with the same products, with the same outcomes, doing the same thing, then we're going to need to find ways to continue to differentiate ourselves. And in the same way that the search engine raised the floor in terms of what knowledge was available, LLMs and knowledge models are going to raise the floor again in terms of what's available. And so in this moment, we're all going to be thinking, how do I differentiate my company? And to differentiate my company, I'm going to hire people who have the kind of expertise that will continue to differentiate my company, which is, can you be more compelling than the next person? Have you proven that you can make decisions about this particular area in a way that's better than the next person? How well do you understand customer needs better than somebody else? Because, a large language model will do a fantastic job of finding the median, but it will never help you find the outlying edges of something, because it is all about averages, the center. And so your job is to go and kind of find the sharp edges of the things you're good at and amplify them, which I think has been true for years, but is just becoming more and more important now. That's my belief anyway, in terms of, I think, where we're going to be going over the next 3 to 5 years at least. It's hard to really understand beyond then.
So I have an example sort of about that, where a client came to me in a session and she was feeling really stuck with a direct report. And she shared with me how the trust between them was eroding, mostly due to deadlines slipping. And with that, money and time were getting lost. And before we talked, speaking of using tools, AI tools, she went to a GPT and she prompted it as a leadership coach. And she asked, how do I help an associate who talks too much and isn't getting work done? And the associate she's speaking of, is a leader that reports to her. So she's a leader of leaders. And the output, it gave her frameworks and a worksheet. It also gave her language around prioritization and boundaries. So it seemed smart, right? It seemed logical and technically correct, but she didn't end up using it because the real issue was trust. And so in our conversation, as we talked about earlier, we slowed things down and we separated observation from judgment, and we looked at patterns, his and hers, and where she was enabling him in some ways, where she felt bad to say certain things or not say certain things. And she also said the same thing over and over in the same words, and she felt like, why is this not helping? So I helped her shift the question from an emotional one to a neutral one, which is, and this was her posing it to him, that when you don't keep our one-to-ones, what message do you think that communicates to me? Because he wasn't keeping their one-to-ones. He was constantly canceling it. And she's his leader. And he was doing that to other people too. So that single reframe changed their entire dynamic. So within hours of our session, he walked into her office and they talked, like really talked. And he had an unlock around this and how his behavior was landing overall. So AI in this situation gave her the structure, but the coaching session gave her the traction that she needed. And that's the difference sometimes. So I'm bringing this up because I offer a single session service called the Resolve Session. And so, this is also another reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, Ben, because you have this powerful platform that you demonstrated to me that on the onset kind of made me a little nervous when I saw it. And, you and I were kind of exploring, like, how could this platform collaborate with coaches so that we could really serve, in essence, the same people that we want to, right? Because it's about looking at patterns in real time. But, when trust breaks down, that's hugely impactful. So
And hopefully, after we had the conversation and you saw the platform, hopefully you felt less nervous, because I think it's so clear to me how differentiated the value is of those two contexts, and that story is a wonderful example of how you can see that somebody needed to have a coach there to be able to recognize this moment and to be able to reframe the problem for her. And an LLM, especially a chatbot, is just not going to have the context it needs. You come at it and it'll say, well, here's the median knowledge that I have on this subject because you use these 5 words, which means I go to that area of the knowledge repository and I start sharing words and frameworks with you. But all she had then was a heuristic. She didn't really have a way to go and solve the problem. And so you gave her an applied way to go and solve the problem. It was no longer a heuristic. And I think that's a crucial piece of, learning. And that's why I think, building Parafoil is something that coaches can use. It's meant to be used in concert with the rest of your development. And it's meant to be a way for you to go and just advance faster, turn the reps into smaller cycles. And so that's what we're trying to do.
So how can leaders be developing these more human-centered capabilities that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think if you're curious, that's a good start. And I think there is knowledge that exists in the world. I think most of my fellow leaders in tech, I would say, go and read a novel, because that's always a great way to start. But I also think getting reflection on how you show up is really important. And so how do you get better reflection on how you show up in different moments, in different contexts, and how you are? And, I will say, as somebody who's consistently putting myself in different contexts, some of which I feel increasingly uncomfortable in, some of which I feel more comfortable in, I'm always looking for a better understanding of how I show up in those different contexts and how I can adjust my behavior to try and make sure that I'm achieving the things I want to in that context. So, for example, in this podcast, I will go back and watch, much to my horror, because I'll have to listen to my own voice, how I did to try and get a better understanding of how it went. Hold my nose and watch it, and all the bits that you're talking I'll be fine with, and then all the bits I'm talking I'll cringe at. But you have to do that. It was 20 years ago, 30 years ago when we were saying to people, you're going to go and learn how to present, go and present in the mirror a few times. Like, that's still true, right? And so I would encourage everyone to go and explore and understand better how you show up, because how you show up will give you a better understanding. You reframe that conversation for that person, and so they were able to be on the receiving end of the conversation they were about to have. More of that,
Yeah. Reframing is definitely a strength of mine. But what you're also highlighting, I have this distinction that I share between somebody who's self-aware and somebody who's profoundly self-aware. Because if I was to go up to every single adult on the planet and ask them, do you think you're a self-aware person? What do you think they would say?
Right. Everyone would say yes, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Right. Like,
Yeah.
well, I'm self-aware. Right.
Yeah.
But the self-aware person just kind of goes, oh, yep, that's how I am. Yep, that's what I do. But they don't do anything to change it. And I'm so grateful and feel so honored to get to work with the people that I work with, because they don't have to do this work. They're at choice to do it, whether it's a direct client or I get subcontracted to do it, whether it's in a business or a corporation. they don't necessarily have to do this kind of work. It's not mandated. So they're at choice in saying, you know what, I want to look at how I'm showing up. I want to be better at how I'm showing up and how that's impacting my relationships, my conversations, my decision making, the impact that I'm having overall. And so I'm very much in awe of people that are willing to sit with me in a session for 45 minutes, hour, 90 minutes. You know, the ease of an AI tool is they can log in and log off anytime they want.
Right.
With me, they can't do that per se, right? They're in essence, there's this unspoken agreement of accountability just being present with me because we had this agreed to scheduled session in the moment. And that's, you know, the power of it, even in the moments where they might be a little uncomfortable.
Which, growth is uncomfortable.
It can be. It often is. Absolutely. Yeah. So what decisions do organizations or leaders need to be ready to make to start measuring and developing these skills in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, the old Drucker principle comes to mind, right? That which measure gets managed. And so, to what extent are you observing and understanding the wealth of data that your organization is generating every single day? Because in your meetings is a wealth of data about what your organizational culture really is. Those leadership behaviors you wrote in November, to what extent are they being activated inside the organization? How much do you really live your values? To what extent do you really have customer centricity in the company in the way that you want to as the CEO? Those are questions that most people in the C-suite are asking, depending upon what their role is. And so by having access to the conversational data, we sort of gather up all of that data, and then we put a wall in the way to make sure that you don't infringe on anybody's privacy, so everybody can speak freely and carry on having the meetings they want to have. But then we surface insights and analytics so that you can understand how much of those leadership behaviors permeating through the organization. Are you living your values? How good is the quality of customer centricity? All those things are those are questions you can start to answer. So if you're going through an AI transformation, and most companies are or will be, you can understand at what velocity are we going through the AI transformation. And that is a leading indicator of performance when company performance, business performance, share price, income, EBITDA, those are all trailing indicators of a company's performance, not leading indicators of a company's performance. So if you want to understand how you're doing, get ahead of it and start to measure the things that are inputs into that process rather than just measuring, how good were the fumes. It's like measuring how good a car was on the basis of its exhaust.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. So as much as I wish sometimes AI didn't show up in our work world, it's
Yeah.
here, right? We can't resist it, fight it. We got to roll with it. And if there was any tool or platform that I would want leaders and organizations to be using, it would be one like yours after seeing it.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I mean
Yeah.
that. So
we want to retain the humanity in work. That's kind of the point. There's a sort of secret corporate name behind Parafoil because we named the company before we named the product, and it's Applied Humanity Incorporated. It's kind of a joke, but it's also just there to kind of like let everyone know that the whole point of this is making sure we put people at the center of work, because without them, there isn't really work.
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you didn't have people, you wouldn't, your platform wouldn't have anybody to evaluate. Right. So
yeah. And there's no one to consume the products that you go and create. I mean, it's just that the whole system doesn't operate unless we have, companies, teams, people generating the things we want, and then we can go and consume them. Whether we like it or not, that is capitalism, and that is the way that we've constructed it. So that's not going to change.
yeah. So I have some fun rapid fire questions for you.
Okay, yeah.
Before
You
I
did
go
warn
there,
me.
yeah,
Okay.
I do have one more question for you that
Yeah.
I almost asked earlier, but I think it's better to ask it now. Because when you and I talked, we were talking about how we're seeing a trend in companies that are in terms of hiring initiatives or just workforce initiatives is they're looking to exclude the more entry-level positions. But I've also seen more recently some interesting posts about how some organizations are removing senior level executive roles, especially in the human resources arena. So what's your take on this?
It's so early. I mean, if we were to look at this as a sort of arc of some kind of industrial revolution of some kind, and that's probably maybe even too big, I don't know, then, we're really in sort of year 2 or 3. The original industrial revolution was a 45-year process. And if you put the sort of the mobile phone or the internet at the beginning of that, we're still only 25, 30 years in. So it's still very early in terms of how long this is going to play out. We've had significantly more innovations than the steam engine in this amount of time. So I don't know how things are going to play out. I couldn't possibly predict in the kind of 5-10 year time horizon. I've got no idea. But my gut says we're all going to make some choices now. We're about our workforces, right? Some of us are going to say, I massively overspent in 2020. And so therefore, I'm going to cut my workforce down, call it AI, and hope my share price goes up. And some people will do that.
Yes. Yep.
Not naming names.
Nope.
And then, and then some people will want to make some bets because they want to get ahead of the curve. And some of those bets will be, do we need to have less people in the HR function? Do we need to have less junior people in the workforce? Do we need to change the shape of what a junior member of the team looks like? Do we need way more salespeople because that's the kind of work we need to go and do more of? I can't predict what the right choices to make are, but I personally, just based on the bet I'm making with my career and building Parafoil, would say to you, HR is not the place you should cut if you're thinking about how to manage cost in your organization, unless you have engendered the kind of HR function which is just about routing tasks and risk evasion. And some HR teams have been built like that. And if all you're doing is risk evasion and routing tasks, then of course, by all means, just, I don't think what you need is a load more traffic cops in the organization. So I think it's probably more about understanding what the function of the role is doing for you today and what it's going to be useful for when you turn the corner of the next 9 months to a year, because that's about as far around the corner as I can probably see. And I imagine most CEOs are in a similar boat right now.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to staying connected with you and having a conversation. I don't know what the cadence might be, but as these things evolve and unfold, I think it would be interesting to stay connected and in touch with, the development of your platform and what you're seeing and experiencing and vice versa. But okay, so audience, one more question for you. If knowledge is becoming available to everyone in the way that it is, what will make your leadership irreplaceable? So, okay, Ben, are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So as much as possible, one word or short phrases. Okay.
Yes.
One leadership skill that will become dramatically more important in the next 5 years.
Compelling storytelling, vision setting.
Okay. One leadership habit that will become obsolete.
Tasks like to-dos, the
Okay,
idea
yeah.
of a to-do.
Yep. I love that. I think other people would like that too. Because their to-do lists are kind of so long.
Just
Okay,
send it to an agent.
Right. One thing leaders should start doing today to prepare for the future of work.
Get feedback. Just go and get feedback. Everyone. And I know that everyone talks about 360 feedback, just feedback. Sorry, that was more than one word.
No, I love that because that comes up a lot in my sessions too, especially when I'm helping someone debrief a 360 that they had to take. Because I think most people look at that, peruse through it, there's so many golden nuggets in there, and then they never look at it again. And so I go through it really slowly with people. But anyway.
And I led people for 4 years and didn't get any feedback at the very beginning of my career, and I wish I'd done it a lot earlier.
Oh my God, I wish I had coached you back then. Yeah. All right. So a book or idea that has influenced how you think about leadership.
Oh, I mean, so many. The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. That was amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, let's use that.
Awesome. One I'll share is Turn This Ship Around. I forget what the author's name is, but that's a great
Oh,
book. And I saw
yeah.
him speak too. Okay. If you could give every leader one piece of advice about AI, what would it be?
Don't panic.
Okay. I like that one. Perfect.
You've got
So,
time.
yeah, but it doesn't feel that way, does it?
No, because it's everywhere. All the news. And also, I think a lot of people have seen this movie before, so they keep wanting to talk about it. But actually, do the thing you're doing. You can make your own choices.
And don't buy into the whole narrative about you're behind, you're behind, you're behind.
Oh,
That's what's creating this urgency. So to hear you say, don't panic, you have time. That I haven't heard anybody else say that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Take action, but don't panic. It's not going to help
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
So Ben, how can people find you and learn more about what you're developing?
Oh, thanks. You can email the entire team, humans@parafoil.co. And that's where all the humans are at parafoil.co. So you can email us all. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, and we'd love to get your messages, but that's the easiest way to get hold of us.
Awesome. So to wrap up, all of this has made me think even more because I think about it all the time. Like truly, what is the role of human coaching in the future? And my sense is that technology can support development, but the human element, the discernment, the context, the emotional intelligence, that still very much matters deeply. And so I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Me
And
too.
yeah, and what also really stood out to me about this idea of technology um, is that the human side of leadership doesn't disappear, and it actually becomes more important. Um, and the ability to think clearly, understand people, make wise decisions in complex situations, that may be that may become the greatest differentiator that leaders have.
Yeah, look, there's always going to be a cohort of people who want to reduce work to a series of computerized tasks. That's not everyone. Those people just happen to shout really loud right now. You
Really
don't have
loud.
to accept it. You know, you can make work somewhere where you want to be. And just because that's the way that they get control over their emotions, it doesn't have to be the way that you get control over yours.
I love it. All right. Well, thanks, Ben, for being here. I
Thanks for
really
having me.
appreciate it. Yes.
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, thanks for also being here or listening to the recording later on. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague or leader in your network who's thinking about the future of work. And if you're navigating leadership decisions, organizational change, or the pressure of leading in uncertain times that we're in, you can learn more about my work at ilovemylife.com, and Jesse is going to share the link in the chat. So thanks again. Until next time, this is Alanna Levenson, and this has been Alchemize with Alanna. Thank you.